Kathy Calvin, the UN Foundation. We all know about the United Nations itself, but what does the foundation do?
Well, you know, the UN has been around for 60 years. The UN Foundation was created in 1998 by Ted Turner, who loved the UN, felt it was a very important international institution that allowed countries to come together to resolve their differences, that provided humanitarian help to people all around the world, and tried to make prosperity something that everybody deserved. But he felt that the United States wasn't appreciating the UN fully, and at that point we weren't even paying our dues. So he said, I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to give the $1 billion to the United Nations and pay the dues, and then ask my government to pay me back. Well, it turns out you can't do that, but he was so convinced it was the right thing to do to support the United Nations and make sure that it could continue its work that he created the foundation to continue to support it. So our mission today is still the same. We help explain the UN to Americans. We urge the Congress and the administration to fulfill our obligations as a dues-paying member to the United Nations and as its host country. And we work to help create public-private partnerships so companies, foundations, and even average citizens can work with the UN in its important work.
A big focus for Rainmakers is about the Millennium Development Goals. So why were the Millennium Development Goals created in the first place?
In the year 2000, the UN thought that it was time to create both a measurable set of goals and a measurable set of targets and interventions that the world could all rally behind. And it was important for two reasons. Donor countries needed to see that there was a plan so that their dollars were being spent effectively. And countries who were receiving the funds and receiving assistance had real plans that they could develop to make better policies, to deliver better services, and show how they were going to impact their own citizens. So the goals became a roadmap for eliminating poverty, for reducing maternal deaths, for ensuring that all children had access to school, for ensuring gender equity. And so the goals were adopted in 2000. It's taken us 10 years for the goals to be really adopted as the world's goals. Not just the UN's goals, not just the member states' goals, but now they are truly the world's goals.
Well, let's get specific, because everything in the first year of Rainmakers is tied into the Millennium Development Goals themselves. Women and girls. Can you give us an example of progress and an example of progress yet to be?
Right. Well, women and girls, I would argue, and I think many people do, that women and girls are the key. If you can invest in women and girls, you're probably going to attack every one of the goals. And frankly, if you don't invest in women and girls, you're probably not going to meet all of the goals. So while there is a goal specifically for gender equity, and of course there should be, we know that girls are a key part of the education goal, which is to ensure primary access for all young people, but especially for girls. And there, to your question about progress and success, we've seen amazing progress in many, many, many countries. Girls are now in school at least through the primary level. Where we see the fall off and where the real work has to be done is keeping them in school in secondary school. When girls don't stay in school, they tend to be married too early, they tend to be mothers way too early, and they tend to lose their opportunity to be functioning, opportunistic citizens of their communities. So we've had real progress on women and girls and education, but we have more to do. The goal that is furthest behind is maternal health. How could that be? It seems so basic, and who wouldn't want to see every mother survive and every mother have a chance to raise her child? But in fact, the numbers of maternal deaths were just a few years ago at 1 million. They've come down to 500,000, and just recently we've seen progress, a 30% reduction in maternal deaths, but it's still way too many. And we know what the interventions are. There are such simple ways to keep a mother alive, starting with having a skilled birth attendant when she's giving a baby, just as we do in most Western countries. So the Secretary General just this year created a global strategy for maternal and children's health so that we can put much more emphasis. And we announced a commitment of $40 billion from donor countries and from countries who are creating new policies to address what we can do to keep more women and children alive.
So what country is a shining example of success?
Well, you know, when you look across all of the countries, many countries are doing pretty well in general, but in specific areas they're struggling. So it's you can't look across just one country as a whole, but a couple countries that people are really proud to see the examples of success are Tanzania, Malawi in Africa, have leadership that's committed to making the goals work, have investments from international companies and donors so that there's an infrastructure and an economy that's rising, lifting all boats, and have a working system where NGOs and others are working. India and China, because they are growing economies, in many pockets are doing extremely well, and they'll help us drive toward overall achievement of the goals by 2015. What we need to focus on are the places that are being left behind, and that will be the focus of the next 5 years. I'll just make one more comment about the goals. In 2000, one of the goals was to reduce AIDS, TB, and malaria.
Perfect segue, because another episode of Rainmakers is about global health.
Excellent. Well, you know, it's so important, and I would say on malaria, in the year 2000, no one thought malaria was containable. And it's crazy because more people die of malaria on the continent of Africa than of AIDS. But we've made incredible progress, and it's a very good example of how the goals can be met. There was new political will, there was new technology. We now have bed nets that can be treated once and they last 5 years. There was social mobilization within the continent of Africa where African leaders became convinced this was their job to make sure their people had a chance to live. And then there were campaigns in the U.S. We run a campaign called Nothing But Nets that invites people to send $10 to save a life by sending a bed net for a family in Africa. It's motivated people tremendously, and we've gone from 22% recognition that malaria exists around the world to close to 70% now, and a total awareness that this is something we can fix. And so we have partners ranging from the National Basketball Association to the United Methodist Church, all of whom are united in this goal of ending malaria by 2015.
Another goal relates to poverty.
Yes.
And another Rainmakers episode is about land ownership and how it relates to poverty alleviation. Has there been progress around the world in helping people own their own land and use it better?
Well, it's a critical goal, and once again we come back to women and girls, because women and girls are often left out of land ownership and land and property rights in general. And it actually goes back to whether or not women and girls are even counted and measured and given IDs. A very basic thing in our country and most Western countries, but if you don't have that, it's very hard to have a way to measure and record land ownership. I think we're going to see a dramatic revolution in the next 5 years in both land ownership and small farm land production. And of course, you may not know, but most farmers are not men, but they're women. And so if you can get women with the right to own and produce from their own land, we know that what happens is that they feed a community. And so there's a huge movement to do two things. One is to make sure land ownership is something that is more readily available, and that the tools, whether it be water or fertilization or seeds, are made much more readily available. And that's a really easy thing to do.
Far and away, it seems that more and more people are saying that the biggest issue that's coming down the road is about water.
Yes.
Well, there's a Rainmakers episode about water, safe water, usable water, drinkable water, even people fighting about water. Tell us about the Millennium Development Goal relating to water.
So water is the 7th goal, and it's a very challenging one because of all the things you just said about the rights to it, the availability of it, and making sure that it's clean. And water affects almost everything because it's at the root of why so many girls are physically and sexually abused, as they have to walk long distances to gather water for their communities, carrying these large buckets on their head. It's a large cause of the diseases in most of southern Africa that are waterborne and related to water. And we know that if we can just clean the water and give people access to clean water and make it easily available, we can deal with disease. And then, of course, water is a scarce commodity in lots of parts of the world, and so having policies that ensure water is available and freely and fairly available is going to be an ongoing political challenge for the world.
How can more people find out about all the great work that you're doing right here at the UN Foundation?
Well, the first place to go is our website. It's www.unfoundation.org. And once you're there, you'll learn about all the campaigns we run. And we run campaigns because we think that's a great way to motivate and engage people. So if you care about adolescent girls, and if you're an adolescent girl yourself, or you know one, or you have one in your family, there's a campaign that we run called Girl Up that lets girls give a high five to girls around the world so that everybody can have the same opportunities as our fabulous, talented, and lucky American girls have. So they can give a high five. They can learn 5 facts about girls around the world. They can tell 5 friends. They can raise $5. So there's a really simple way for them to be engaged and feel like they're making a difference. And we know they're compassionate and they're energized and want to share and help. So that's one great campaign that we run. We just announced here in New York this week a campaign called the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. Now here's a great example of an issue that cuts across women, health, the environment, by giving the opportunity for women who are the cooks in the families to cook in homes with stoves that aren't releasing dangerous black soot and black carbon into the environment and into their families' lungs. So there's all kinds of campaigns on our website. You can also learn more about the role of the UN in solving large problems that Americans care about, ensuring that we have peacekeepers in some of the hot zones around the world so Americans aren't sending their own soldiers in every one of those cases. You can learn more about how the UN is bringing opportunities for peace in the Middle East and in different parts of the world where people need to come together. And you can learn all about the great humanitarian work that the United Nations does in a disaster such as Haiti. There's lots of opportunities for people to get engaged as well.
So all around the world, that's where you work. You work there personally. You're not just the ambassador to the world, you're the protector of the world. So tell us, Kathy Calvin, what's the best success story you've ever seen?
I have to say it's our work around adolescent girls. I'll give you one quick story about Ethiopia. We, working with the United Nations Population Fund, focused on an Ethiopian community where girls were being married at the ages of 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That's wrong. Girls shouldn't be married that early. But it was culturally relevant there, and many families were allowing their daughters to marry early because of economic reasons. So we felt we needed to address the economics of child marriage with the economics of keeping girls in school. So we worked on a program that offered a family a goat or a sheep if they would keep their girls in school for 2 more years. And at first, the fathers were resistant. This gave the girls some economic power, this changed the dynamic, but the fathers are now the biggest champions of keeping the girls in school, and it's way beyond the goat and the sheep because they've seen what's happened when their girls stay in school longer. They see the value that they can bring to their family, and they see the future that the world holds for them. So that program is one that we happen to love and know that it works, and it's being replicated now across Ethiopia and in other countries. And if we can do anything to reduce the number of girls who marry too early and stop the progress of their lives, we'll have done something really great.
How do we get from here to 2015?
Well, you know, it's not just the UN and it's not just the UN Foundation that are going to be key to our getting to 2015 and achieving the Millennium Development Goals. It's everyone. And that's the most exciting opportunity ahead of us. Every school child, every parent, every business should be concerned with how we get to 2015 and the goals are met. And Rainmakers TV has stepped up to this challenge. And I'm really grateful because you're showing that there's a way for people to learn more, to get engaged, and then to act on their passions. And then together we can all get to 2015 with a success story.